You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
Constant reminder to me that the flesh is weak. Give me that pious crap, Des. I can't talk to you, I can't talk to anyone. Handwriting can be very useful in a case like this. Tommy did it too.
I don't care when they killed her. I just don't care.
You may remember me. My name is Joe Rask. Is anybody here from Cleveland?
You may be hot poo back in Cleveland, but around here you're just warm snot.
All right, let's not get nasty. I know the 60s must have been rough. Are you ready to party? Are you ready to rock and roll?
From what I can see, you're not a fit mother.
And since when are you an authority on fit mothers? Since when are you an authority on anything?
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Next week, we are paying tribute to a filmmaker we know and love on this show. We'll find out a little later who it is, but join the sleaze.
That's right. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for 6 years, I believe, at this point. There's like 150 bonus episodes, as well as our bonus transmission series, where we talk about new release genre films, which new Mad Max movie out, new Planet of the Apes movie out. We have a lot of things that we're going to be talking about over on the Patreon soon, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast for everyone interested in that. And speaking of which, we had a lot of people make the jump this week. So I'm going to, forgive me, I'm going to have to speed through some of this. We had Benjamin Hurst, we had Tyler Schoonover sign up, we had Andrew Gaines sign up at the annual tier because you can get a little bit of a discounted monthly rate if you sign up for an entire year in advance. So thanks to Andrew for that. We had Chris Rahr sign up, we had Tim Holland sign up, Andreas, Matt Caracciolo, we had Thomas Burkhart, we had Luke, we had Josh Hughes, we had Guy Ramey Morani, we had Stephen Wilson upgrade from $5 a month to $10 a month. Is going to be joining us for the monthly virtual screening, which we try to do on the last Thursday of every given month, and we watch a movie live with you guys. So thanks to Stephen. We had Dustin Johnson sign up at $5, Conrad Rushing sign up at the annual tier, Sean Mellon signed up, Joshua Hughes, Amy signed up for an entire year. We had Elijah Crawford sign up, Ezrael, Caden Miller, Clay Jackson also a year. A lot of people did, a couple more years too. Kale Solomon also did a year. Moderately Cold also did. A lot of people getting the annual tier for those interested. Yeah. We also had Owen Campbell, Logan Morrison, Devin Void, Ben Reed, Mr. Dog, Matt C., Ben Patton, Sam, Nick, Henry, Ilnicki, and last but not least, Max Sloth. So thanks so much to all of you folks. Hope you are enjoying all those bonus episodes. We appreciate the support.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's awesome, guys. Thank you.
That's the one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you're listening on either one of those platforms, and I can see the stats, I can see you right now listening on both those platforms, give us a good old rating and review over there. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners. And the last plug, as always, is merch. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for our show, you can get that put on basically anything that you guys can think of, and you freaks have thought of a lot of stuff. You guys have gotten hoodies, pillows, notebooks, coffee mugs. The links to that are in the description of this episode, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com for anyone who's interested. But that is it for the intro. Welcome back to another week. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I believe 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks over on the main feed here would have heard from us, and we would have had special returning guest Cameron Feder of Podcast About List back on the show, because he's our resident monster guy, our resident guy in rubber suits correspondent. And so we were doing a sequel episode. We were talking about the sequels to one of the most enduring science fiction concepts and depressing pop studio franchises of all time, the Planet of the Apes. So we had to have Cameron on to talk about what are arguably the two best sequels in the franchise. We talked about Don Taylor's Escape from the Planet of the Apes from 1971, which took the franchise in a kind of fun fish out of water time travel adventure movie direction until suddenly it is an incredibly upsetting like 70s political thriller with like chimp baby murder, and so it's wild.
Yeah, very suddenly too.
And we paired it obviously with the follow-up film, J. Lee Thompson's more action-heavy entry, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes from 1972, which begins in this more like retro Orwellian sort of sci-fi dystopia, and then eventually becomes this, straight up fiery armed ape prison uprising.
Yeah, it's if you want to watch 100 dude in chimpanzee costumes just beating the hell out of cops, that is the movie for you. Let me tell you, it's a magical time.
I don't know if there's another one. That might be the movie.
That
I
might
think
be
you're
the
right.
only movie that describes that. Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. So if you haven't heard that episode 2 weeks ago over on the main feed with Cameron, go back, go check it out. But then last week, because we were kind of so heavy into apes mode, because there was a brand new Planet of the Apes movie that had come out for the first time, mind you, while we have been doing the show, there was also for the first time a brand new Mad Max movie that has come out during our tenure on this show, which inspired us to do an episode on kind of mythological warriors, code word warriors. Namely, like the Greek or the Western variety. But what if they were updated for a more futuristic comic book, post-apocalyptic gang setting by filmmakers who love to work in sort of stripped down, bare bones kind of narratives, and they like all kinds of crazy visual detail and kinetic, wordless action sequences. And so we paired Walter Hill's cult classic, The Warriors, from 1979, about a gang of New York City delinquents who run across the city all night like they're in a 70s rock and roll odyssey. We love Walter Hill on the show. It was about time we finally got around to it. But we paired it with George Miller's high-octane action extravaganza sequel to his Australian outback gearhead revenge movie, Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior from 1981, which is still just an absolute miracle of controlled mayhem genre filmmaking.
Yeah, total masterpiece. I mean, assless chaps and heavy metal, how can you go wrong,
Yeah, it is crazy that man has spent decades slowly acquiring more and more studio resources to turn his every thought in his unhinged Australian mind into essentially like Western chase movie blockbusters at this point, while still maintaining all that weird, nasty detail that was there on day one.
Yeah, it's incredible. And it's honestly like, even when we were looking back on Mad Max 2, it has a very, conventional plot, but just the imagination he throws into it makes it just completely fresh. And then you have a 20-minute finale of just individually designed cars in a desert,
stuntmen almost dying left and right.
Crazy. It's crazy. It's so good.
Yeah. So if you haven't heard that episode, that was last week over on the Patreon feed. Again, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast for anyone who's interested in that. But moving on to this week, toning things down a little bit, slowing things down a little bit. We are joined by a very special first-time guest, a rock critic who's written about music and culture for Uproxx, Grantland, Pitchfork, Rolling Stone, the AV Club, among many others, as well as hosted a number of rock music podcasts and written a number of books, including ones on Radiohead and Pearl Jam, and most recently, and available to purchase now, There Was Nothing You Could Do, an excellent new book on legendary heartland rocker poet Bruce Springsteen's seminal album, Born in the USA, and the cultural and political climate that it was born from and inspired. That guest is Steven Hyden. Steven, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I love hearing about all of these genre films you guys are discussing on the show. It's quite a litany of great cinema that you are running through here.
Yeah, we've been at this for a little while now, and there's been a good excuse to go wild recently with Planet of the Apes and Mad. We've been saying this for a while now, but this is the one case where we're happy with remakes, because our whole show is just going back to the originals every time one of these things come out. So it's been a wonderful time. But Steven, it's very great to have you here. You have an awesome new book that's out. I have personally always been a huge fan of Springsteen and his very lyrical and expressive, working class style of rock that you described in your book and that many other critics kind of described as kind of connecting that youthful rock and roll energy almost of Elvis with that more uplifting, sometimes depressing sort of like American political and social protest poetry of someone like Bob Dylan. But I had basically always been a casual listener, through osmosis, the poppy singles, Born in the USA. It's only been in the last few years that I've actually been picking up his records on vinyl and really sitting there and engaging with them, starting in like the Born to Run and Darkness on the Edge of Town era, which I actually loved so much. I actually had trouble like wanting to move on from it for a while. I just was like, no, I'm just going to keep listening to these, Backstreets, Jungle Land. I don't know. Does there need to be other songs? I don't know. But I've basically only gotten as far as Nebraska and Born in the USA, which made it amazing timing for your book, which I loved reading, and for this episode, in which you have handpicked two titles you write about in the book for how they connected to this period of his music and those two records specifically. So, Steven, very briefly, what two films are we talking about today, and why did they jump out at you when you were writing a book about Bruce Springsteen?
So, the films that I picked, the first one is True Confessions, which is a film from 1981, starring Robert De Niro and Robert Duvall. And this is a film that I picked because it's a movie that Bruce talks about watching when he was basically writing the songs for Nebraska. And it's interesting to me because people always talk about Badlands with Nebraska, the Terrence Malick film. Classic movie, which is obviously connects to Nebraska in terms of like Charlie Starkweather, that whole story, the title song for Nebraska. But people never talk about True Confessions, and this is a movie that in the song, there's a book from 1998 called Songs, where Bruce, it's a collection of lyrics where Bruce like writes a little bit about each album, and he talks about Badlands in that book, but he also talks about True Confessions also being a record that was very influential for him when he was working in Nebraska. So I just felt like True Confessions is sort of like an overlooked movie in the lore of Bruce Springsteen with that record. And the other the other movie that I picked was Light of Day, Paul Schrader, 1987. This is a movie that was originally titled Born in the USA. It was a screenplay that Paul Schrader had sent to Bruce Springsteen. There was a period like where Bruce actually was considering becoming an actor, and Paul Schrader sent him this screenplay about two brothers playing in a Cleveland bar band. And he sent it to Bruce, and Bruce ended up not being in the movie, but he saw the title on the screenplay, which was Born in the USA. He took the title, and he ended up thanking Paul Schrader in the liner notes of Born in the USA.
It's true. I literally grabbed my record off the shelf and I was like, there it is. Thanks to Paul Schrader. It's right on there.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes. So, and it's a very interesting movie in the career of Paul Schrader. It's a very un-Paul Schrader-like film in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And
absolutely.
And in the book, I ended up writing about Paul Schrader's filmography a bit and linking it to Bruce Springsteen's work in the late 70s, because I think there is a lot of parallels there. And there's like some weird parallels like with Bruce Springsteen and Taxi Driver. I don't know if you guys like want to get into that at all, but anyway,
yeah, when we jump into Light of Day, I'd be glad to take a brief detour into possible what is it? It's Bruce Springsteen possibly inspired. That you talking to me? Is that?
Yeah, exactly.
Hell yeah.
But like Light of Day, it's a film that like people don't really talk about in like Paul Schrader's career, but I don't know. Hopefully you guys like enjoyed watching it. I definitely enjoyed writing about it in the book. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of the more overlooked Paul Schraders because it's not about a lonely guy wanting to murder someone in a room.
Exactly.
But
True Confessions too is another movie that's like no one remembers it, even though like it has like such a great pedigree, like great actors in it, like the director of the film. Made
great writers too, which we'll talk about, like Joan Didion is I'm excited because these two were ones that True Confessions I hadn't seen before, and Light of Day I had watched because I'm just such a Schrader acolyte but it was even one of those ones where you had to go pretty deep into watching all of his movies before you eventually got there. And I was struck too that these two films worked as a pairing because they're very much about deeply religious kind of American families and the sort of the bonds of siblings being tested a bit. And I'm especially excited to hear about Light of Day from Jamie, who some might know is a singer in a metal band from Cleveland. So who's going on tour in a couple weeks. So he's about to live that movie.
it was pretty cool to see all those details. And something about both these movies too, they're kind of they're understated in a very like purposeful way. It feels like they almost have plots that you'd think would just be more driven, but instead they spend a lot of time just with the characters themselves, kind of almost on downtime in a sense, learning about them a lot of the time while the plot is developing. But there's just so much like familial melodrama and all of that. So I just given the plots, I wasn't exactly expecting to be what both of these turned into being. So it was interesting. Also, this one, the first one we're going to be talking about, True Confessions, I guess Paul Schrader was originally going to direct this. So just to have that tie-in for both movies is cool too.
That's also true. It was a little bit of a different time for Schrader. Early 80s versus late 80s. Yeah. There was some transformations that happened there, but I'm excited to jump into these. So let's kick things off here. Let's jump into True Confessions.
Or maybe he doesn't know what a bagman is, your brother. They don't teach them things like that at the seminary.
This brother of yours is a little disturbed. You gotta watch out for him.
Well, he very well might be right. What are you doing? Get back!
Tommy, did he do it?
I don't care whether they killed her. I just don't care.
Go in peace.
All right, we are talking True Confessions, the 1981 American neo-noir crime drama directed by Ulu Grosbard, written by husband and wife novelist duo Joan Didion and John Gregory Dunn, adapting Dunn's 1977 novel, and starring the two Roberts. Literally, actually, this apparently was the marketing. Come watch the two Roberts, De Niro and Duvall, reuniting after not having a scene together in The Godfather Part 2, but both being in it. This time as Irish-American brothers Spellacy. Desmond, a Roman Catholic priest on his way to becoming a bishop or a monsignor, or I guess he is a monsignor on his way to becoming a bishop in the LA Archdiocese, and Tom, an LAPD homicide detective in the late 1940s, who, due to a Black Dahlia-style murder of a prostitute, they're both kind of forced to reckon with the corruption of their community. This is our second time talking about Ulu Grosbard, the Belgian filmmaker who fled the country to Havana and then to the United States during the rise of the Nazis. He was a guy who ended up an assistant director for Elia Kazan on Splendor in the Grass, and Robert Wise on West Side Story, and even Robert Besson on The Hustler, Sidney Lumet, I think, for The Pawnbroker. This man knew his way around some bitter, bleak melodrama and 1960s character studies, and he also directed plays for David Mamet, including American Buffalo, which starred Duvall, which might have been part of the connection here. And the last time we talked about him was the very tragic and considered 1978 crime drama Straight Time, which we really loved on the show. It was like a blueprint for the intelligent, fatalistic kind of ex-convict humanity and existentialism of Michael Mann. We were not surprised to learn that he did an uncredited draft on that movie, especially the romantic scenes, because we were like, this is Thief. We were like, this is Thief. Right. It's Dustin Hoffman in Thief.
That's like, and Straight Time is like one of my favorite movies of all time. And
it's amazing.
In my previous book, I wrote a book about Pearl Jam called Long Road, and I actually squeezed in a reference to Straight Time into that book, where I sort of made an analogy with a song to, there's a scene in Straight Time at the end, like where he drops Teresa Russell off, and like it's at the end of the movie, and he's, I'm paraphrasing it, I can't remember the exact scenario, but like he drops Teresa Russell off, and he's like, he's about to drive off, and he's like, he basically says like, I want to get caught at the end of the movie. I don't know if you guys remember that part.
Yeah, I do. And then I remember it going to the photograph of him, of his like first convict like photograph, like when he was a kid, because it was based on Ed Bunker's writing of being like a career criminal and like being thrown into the, into the prison system as like essentially a child. So yeah, it's a really great movie for anyone who hasn't seen it. We did an episode on it. I would recommend, especially too, because obviously it's Ulu Grosbard once again here, but it's also the same cinematographer who shot that film, Owen Roseman, who shot French Connection and Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3, which we were, we loved the blunt sort of grimy photography of that film, and we definitely liked the kind of realistic, almost mundane sort of journalistic register it could sometimes do about like the American rehabilitative process and like the dehumanizing experience that Ed Bunker was writing about, being someone who was in and out of prison. But we also were impressed that Grosbard could do those exciting armed robbery, like thriller sequences. Like he was, for a guy who was for hire on that, because Dustin Hoffman wanted to direct it, but he didn't feel that he could pay as much attention to the performance. And maybe the studio was also like, we want like a more surefire hand here. Grosbard was attached to it. And it's part of what got him the gig for True Confessions, because, he knew Duvall. He already proved that he could adapt a crime novel for the screen quite gracefully. He got to reunite with a lot of his crew. He jumped into this project for the original novelist John Gregory Dunn and his screenwriting partner and wife, novelist Joan Didion, who had also written out the Al Pacino heroin addiction drama Panic in Needle Park and the 70s A Star is Born adaptation together. And as Jamie mentioned, they originally hoped to get Paul Schrader on this, who had just written Raging Bull for De Niro and Scorsese, and had gotten his own directing career started with Blue Collar and Hardcore. I guess he went on to do American Gigolo instead of this at the time, but there was a reason that all of these forces were briefly connected here. And yeah, this was my first time watching it. Jamie, this was your first time watching as well. But it's, Steven, when was your first experience with this? Did you watch it for the first time because you were like, Bruce said to watch it, so I watched it? Or had you already seen it?
Yeah, no, I watched it, because I was writing this book, and it was interesting for me because, again, I feel like with Nebraska in particular, I feel like Badlands is always the film that gets brought up as the inspiration for
and it's
that
always because of
album.
the title track, right? Because the narrative of the song is just so close to the killing spree in Badlands. Although I've always found it a little bit also like In Cold Blood, like that execution passage of the song reminds me of that.
Badlands because of the Charlie Starkweather connection. I think,
and he did a song called Badlands, so everyone just goes, he must love Badlands.
Yeah, exactly. So like when Bruce, again, in that book Songs, the collection of lyrics that was put out in the late 90s, like when I was reading that and he mentions True Confessions, I was like, oh, this is a film that like doesn't really get brought up when people talk about Springsteen at this time. And it was interesting to me watching the movie and feeling like, okay, it may not like literally connect to Nebraska as clearly as Badlands does, but I think in terms of the tone of the film, it feels more aligned with what Bruce was doing, because Badlands, I mean, obviously a brilliant film, but like that movie, I think Terrence Malick's approach to the material, it has this, to me, like a quirky, almost like dark comedy feel to the film. Like it's obviously, it's following this couple. There's like shootings taking place, like they kill the girl's father. There's dark content happening. But I think the tone of the film it's not a morality play. It does have like more of a whimsical feel to it. Whereas
I get that in the music, especially for that film.
Yeah, exactly. And it's partly like the reason why that film is so influential, I think, because there is a slightly, I think, detached feeling to that movie where Malick is observing the violence in that movie, not in like sort of a hard-hitting way, but in like a more sort of, again, like ironic, detached fashion that other filmmakers, I think, were very influenced by when they saw that movie. Whereas like True Confessions, I think, is a more straightforward morality type play tone. It is a movie that, and I say this affectionately, I think it is like a more turgid type movie. It's more downbeat.
Yeah, I get that.
And in a way that Nebraska is. Like Nebraska, for all of its brilliance, like it's not like a funny album. Like there's not like a sense of humor on that record. There is definitely a sort of it's not a heavy-handed album, but it's like a downbeat album.
Yeah, no, I mean, the first time I listened to it, I was coming off of even just listening to like Born to Run, and you have this such lush production and such amazing instrumentation. And I watched, and I love Nebraska, but I was like, man, this is a really lonely and depressed sounding. It's more raw sounding.
Yeah, I mean, remember like Born in the USA is a record like where there's downbeat lyrics, but like the music is uplifting and ingratiating. Whereas like Nebraska is a record where it's downbeat lyrics and downbeat music. Like you're not going to misinterpret the meaning of these songs in the way that like some people misinterpreted songs on Born in the USA. So
like this is an anthem about how great America is.
Yeah, exactly. And so in a way, I kind of feel like True Confessions is more in line with what Bruce did on Nebraska. You know, like to me, it's really interesting because Bruce, like when he started writing Nebraska, like those songs, it's 1981. It's the fall of 1981. He's just come off the tour for The River. It's the first time in his life really like where he has any money, and he's living in this house in Colts Neck, New Jersey, which in my mind I picture as being like just a downtrodden cabin in the middle of nowhere, but in reality it's like a pretty affluent community in New Jersey. And you know, he's reading like history books. He's like pretty isolated. He's thinking a lot about his childhood, and he's not really engaging with like much modern pop culture. I mean, like the biggest film in America at that time was like Raiders of the Lost Ark. You know, like that was like the biggest movie in America. But like True Confessions was one of the only sort of like modern movies that he was watching and engaging with. Otherwise it was like older movies. You know, he's reading like older books. It's not really like modern pop culture at all. But like True Confessions is like one of the only kind of like really like, you know, like this is a movie that's just coming out. And you know, True Confessions like was not really a hit at all. And it just felt like this is one of those movies that feels like an echo of like the 70s type of film, like where it's just like a downbeat character study, you know, that was big in the 70s, but like was not going to really matter in the 80s for much longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think you're spot. I mean, I went back and actually this week I went back and listened to Nebraska because I was like, you know, trying to get into the mindset. So I was like, I'm in Bruce mindset. I'm listening to the album. I'm watching the movie. I'm going back and forth. I'm seeing, you know, what he's seeing in it. And I mean, I liked going back to the album in the first place because Atlantic City is maybe my favorite song that he's done. So I was stoked to just jump right back into that anyway. But the song that actually stood out to me in relation to True Confessions was Highway Patrolman, because that is about a cop brother forced to arrest his, or not arrest his violent sort of Vietnam vet brother, Frankie. And he's all talking about the distinction between, like Frankie is no good, but also a man who turns on his back on his family. Well, he just ain't no good either. And so there's a little bit of that sort of brotherly relationship, that kind of contradiction that's existing there. And I think for a lot of people in 1981, it was like the idea of Duvall and De Niro as brothers. They were like, now that's a movie. And I think you highlighted this in your book too, but I think also the predominant sort of critique of the movie was kind of like, maybe they should have swapped brother roles, because, Duvall is playing the homicide detective and De Niro is playing the Monsignor. And I think most people just kind of had issues with De Niro as a Monsignor following Raging Bull and following Taxi Driver. And they were kind of just like, the idea of him as a priest feels a little strange to us, even though I don't think he's bad in the role. It's also just a very kind of quiet role for him after doing so many kind of louder performances.
I mean, I think people who saw the movie in the moment felt like, oh, if De Niro played the cop would have had more swagger, and there
which is probably true, but is that the point of the movie?
If Duvall was playing the priest, it would have had maybe more of a Tom Hagen type feel to it, more of an underplaying type thing. And it is an interesting thing with that movie, because I don't know how you guys felt about it. Like when I watched it, like it's not like a satisfying film to watch. Like
it's not.
Yeah, you feel you're waiting for it to pay off, and it really doesn't. And I think when people watch it in the moment, they felt like, well, if De Niro were the cop, there would have been more of a catharsis.
He would have solved the mystery.
He would have solved the mystery, and like it would have been more of a sort of an expression of catharsis maybe at the end of the movie, and like it would have felt like more satisfying to watch it. Whereas like if Duvall were playing the priest, there would have been more of like a Tom Hagen type quality to it, which audiences would have been maybe more familiar with him in that role, and it would have made sense. But I don't know. It's not a satisfying watch, but in a weird way, it does fit with the movie, because I think the movie is about defeat. It's about not being satisfied. And when I was writing about, Nebraska and Born in the USA, like it kind of felt like, oh, this makes sense, because like when Bruce was watching this film and he was writing these songs, his songs were about defeat. His songs were about people not achieving that cathartic moment in their lives, like where they're going to feel like they've sort of achieved something. And in a weird way, maybe that makes the movie more successful, even if it's like not very fun to watch, So I don't know. Like, so in a weird way, maybe that makes the movie successful because it's unsuccessful.
Yeah, and
I see that.
I mean, in a way too, it almost tells you at the very beginning that it's kind of doomed from the start in a sense, like because once you see the character that De Niro is playing and Duvall, they come together because it's kind of at the tail end of everything and their lives in a sense, or their relationship, and you get just information that Desmond is dying. And he's in this, kind of just very poor looking church, and it doesn't seem like things are going very well. And then you cut to the actual story that we're going to be following, and it's all about his, he's on his rise. He's dealing with a lot of corrupt but very powerful people, and so once you already have that context, it kind of feels doomed from the start, and so you just kind of settle into just a very somber, slow moving story. And you just kind of have to, it is a little strange to have them, have De Niro be the priest, because there's also this dynamic of the younger and older brother. You'd almost think, I think it would be interesting actually to have the priest be older and going through the corruption. This comes off as, and I still think it works, of course, it works in a different way, but this comes off as like a a wiser older brother trying to teach his younger brother the ways of morality. And it doesn't all work in that sense, but there's that almost becomes the dynamic instead of having them switch the roles.
Yeah, well, I was reading up on some contemporary reviews for the time, and there was one that stood out by Dave Kerr, who said that the film looks like an attempt to make a Martin Scorsese movie without Martin Scorsese, which almost sounds like a review someone would make on Letterboxd like today. But he wrote that in 1981, and I sort of understood where he was coming from. Like, I watched this and I went, well, this is if Martin Scorsese made like a very low energy Chinatown, that's maybe what this would look like, because you have the Catholic guilt, sort of like family melodrama qualities. You do eventually get this disturbing kind of James Ellroy-esque kind of corrupt LA noir conspiracy. I was not surprised to learn that Ellroy actually was a huge fan of this novel when it came up, and he would go up to obviously do his own Black Dahlia thing, and he would do LA Confidential. And a friend of the pod, Matt Chrisman, even called this movie like low T Ellroy, which I didn't think was like entirely inaccurate. It's like Ellroy if he was like kind of calm and sweet.
I mean, it's definitely like
a weird psycho.
It's like the weird missing link between Chinatown and LA Confidential. Like, it's like the movie in the 80s that was going for that, and it's not as good as either film on either side of that equation. I mean, I think that's all true. I mean, like, for me, like, writing this book, I was more interested in like why Bruce was attracted to this movie, and I think and we've touched on it already, like the obvious there's like the brother theme, there's like definitely like biblical overtones, I think, to you've got like the like the brothers like on either side of the law, and it's like not clear like which brother is like the good brother, because definitely like De Niro as like the priest, he's associated like with corrupt forces. Like Charles Durning is like this pimp that is like in bed with the church that De Niro's with, and like Duvall is the cop, but he's sort of like a corruptible force. So it's not quite clear like who's good and who's bad. I think that's definitely something that Springsteen like wrote a lot about, that sort of corruptible morality at the time.
Definitely.
I also think that the world of this film, it takes place in 1948, which is the year before Springsteen was born, and it's really the world of his father, Doug Springsteen, who's someone that like Bruce writes a lot about in his songs, and was a big presence in his life. And like with Nebraska, like the way that it was discussed, like when the record came out, like people talked about this as a very contemporary record. Like they talked about it as like a snapshot of like Reagan era America, like these characters taking place in like a world of like trickle down economics. Like they're struggling to survive. They're resorting to petty crime in some cases to try to survive. But in reality, like Springsteen was very obsessed with his own childhood and the world of his dad. And I think that was part of like what drew him to this film, like this world of,
there is a looking back on the 1940s, right? Like from the present. That's what that whole wraparound segment is, where you see these older guys, and they already kind of living a little bit with regret, but things have kind of calmed down, and then then we go back and we see what exactly it was that kind of brought them to this point.
And it's that whole thing about like why I think filmmakers were attracted to making films about the 1940s, like filmmakers in the 70s, I guess into the 80s, like why they went back, where this was the period of their childhood, so they have nostalgia for it, but they're also depicting it as like a very corrupt time. So you have the juxtaposition of like nostalgia for this, World War II era type world, but also people feeling like, oh, there was like a lot of just terrible things happening at the same time. So I think that was something that Springsteen was also exploring, that he probably had a lot of affection for that world, but also he was coming to grips with like how like fucked up this world was at the same time.
which is a perfect sensibility. And if you want to do a 1970s, new Hollywood cynical prestige kind of awards film, like what they were aiming for here. And I read up that they were trying to get this ready for the award circuit in time. They were hoping to get both Roberts nominated. And I think that's ultimately because I ended up liking this movie. And there is a lot to like about it. I do think that there's some qualities that it's being both the kind of noir procedural and also the sort of family melodrama. And in some ways, I think it ends up kind of underplaying some of its hand that it could have played. Like it doesn't quite have the momentum of like a harrowing noir procedural, as like Steven's been kind of pointing out, that it also doesn't have one of the most disturbing endings in movie history that movie obviously has the advantage of having.
This one's pretty everything's gonna be okay in some way.
It also just doesn't quite have the intense sense of
urgency,
the intense punishment that I feel like I get out of Scorsese. There's something feverish and anguished about, some of the relationships that you see in something like Mean Streets or something.
Or even the director's own work. Like, I mean, you brought up Straight Time, which I think is such a masterful film where that's a crime movie that it's very gritty. It has a lot of realism to it, but it also delivers the goods.
The thriller sequences, are fantastic. That robbery in Beverly Hills is amazing.
It's a great thriller on top of being this sort of authentic slice of life. We're showing you what it's like to be a convict type film. In True Confessions, it doesn't deliver as like a pulpy thriller. It just feels like a sort of, again, I'll use the word turgid. I think turgid is like a good descriptor of this film because it does feel kind of like a joyless, very gray looking movie. It doesn't move in the same way that like Chinatown or LA Confidential does.
I kind of liked how you described it in your book though, Steven. You described it as like a morality play that serves up its sin and spiritual decay in a very straightforward fashion. Like I think that's a good way of describing it, because it's both what's good, that's a deliberate choice it's making, and it's also something that just maybe doesn't quite work about it, but also gives it some some interesting elements, because it's very handsomely made, but it's playing itself in a minor key, and sometimes that means it can be a little bit in sort of an unfocused register. It can be a little vague. It can be a little unsatisfying, especially as a noir or a thriller. But it does end up developing some of the characters and the performances enough that I do find Duvall is pretty good. I maybe could have used a little bit more out of De Niro, just being a little bit more tortured about the specific dilemma that he finds himself in, just being lost between, trying to do good for the church, but realizing that he, needs to use some sort of corruptible power in order to do that. He does come across just being a little bit more mildly sad and annoyed about the situation.
De Niro is he's been put in. De Niro is like a little nondescript, I think, in the movie, and that he
just plays it in such a low key register where you're like, I feel like you could have tweaked that one just a little. I think he's maybe deliberately trying to be like, I'm changing it up. I'm not going to the place that like Scorsese would make me go to. I'm trying to play a little bit of a different character, play against type a little bit. But I don't know.
I just love imagining Bruce Springsteen at like a Cineplex in 1981 being like, I could go see Raiders of the Lost Ark, but I'm going to go see True Confessions, and I'm going to wallow in this rumination on sin.
Mm-hmm. But see,
it's going to line up with what
that's
I'm
an element
about.
that I think does work. Like there's a lot of scenes in this, and we'll get into the specifics of it, but there are a lot of scenes where it's just like, De Niro walking thoughtfully through like a church courtyard. Or like Duvall walking around the LA underbelly, and there's this mournful score playing. And I think that these are scenes that I could almost imagine some of Springsteen's Nebraska songs like serenading in the way that Bob Dylan does for like Pat Garrett or something like that. And those were the moments of like very quiet, just reflection on the situation these characters have found themselves in. And I think that these filmmakers are smart enough to, gather some ideas through this. Like, I mean, I really like the opening when they first flash back to 1948 The credits of the film focus on kind of the rituals and the size of Desmond's church, his wealthy congregation, including the very clearly corrupt construction tycoon Jack Amsterdam, played by Charles Dunning, who is the large, sweaty detective in Dog Day Afternoon as well. And here he's a stand-in for like bloated American greed, essentially. He's also surprisingly good at Irish dancing in the one moment where he gets to do it. He
Just
gets to rip an Irish. Yeah. But his daughter's getting married in the church, and it's a very lavish church. And, basically, De Niro turns a blind eye to his corruption and his gambling and his trafficking and his former days as a pimp, because it's a financial benefit to the church and the schools that he builds essentially at cost. And so you immediately get a contradiction for like, here's a guy who's been respected into the church community. And then you contrast that with the more dingy sort of LA prostitution joints that Tom Duvall is investigating, and where he feels he's seeing kind of like the real LA. He finds things like a priest that his brother knows having a heart attack while committing the mortal sin of having sex with a prostitute, and he needs to keep that quiet and kind of cover that up a little bit. And we also learn at one point that Tom was like a bag man for Jack when he was a pimp, and he knows some of the nasty shit that guy's done to his business rivals, like throw a guy in an industrial dryer, I think they say at one point. There's some sort of nasty written details in here.
And there's also like just almost a side thing from the morality. It feels also that he's just trying to save his brother at a certain point too, because he knows that if there is, if this image gets out, he's working with these people that have done these things in the past. Obviously he can't become a bishop. He's not going to have the same reputation as a priest. So I like that he's kind of balancing those things, the Duvall character, a little bit. Like, he obviously wants to solve the case. He wants to bring these people to justice and everything, but he knows that his brother is going to be directly connected to all that, and it will ruin his life. And also this is straight up from The Godfather, so I don't know if I can give it much credit, but I do kind of like just the idea that it really does accent family around the wedding, like specifically like all the children running around. And it's just, it's a little image that kind of works with the corruption we know that all the adults are doing while they're, taking care of their families, so to speak. So, but that is straight from The Godfather. So, I mean, it's true. But
I just like the stark visual distinction between De Niro in his robes walking around this lavish church, and then you get Duvall in his, filthy, suit, kind of going into a prostitution house and being like, well, here's a priest who's died of a heart attack, whoops.
Yeah, and he's that we were kind of talking about, I guess I would use the word, it's like there's a plainness even in the crime scenes. There's not a lot of just speaking on the direction, there's not a lot of these close-ups on the body parts or these quick flashes to murder sequences or anything like that. It's usually just the aftermath and them very kind of slow pacingly talking to each other about the circumstance, but there's a lack of emotion. There's not a lot of shock and awe or anything like that. It's just kind of discussing what's happening and then moving along with the case.
Oh yeah, I mean, honestly, the opposite of that. They're so casual about it. They're kind of nasty about it. Like when they find the woman Lois, who's been cut in half at the waist, and she's been sort of left in a field ditch near some houses. And obviously, once again, this was modeled after the Black Dahlia murder. The detectives are so used to this sort of thing that that they're cracking jokes about, like the gruesome sight. Like you can see that in the background the actual the slicing in half and everything, and Duvall's partner Frank, played by Kenneth McMillan from Taking a Pelham and Amadeus, he's talking about the boxing fight the night before and figuring out the logistics of how many stretchers do they need 2 stretchers because it's been cut in half, and and he's delivering horrible lines. They found a church candlestick up her joy trail, or she's a 9 to 5 stiff, no overtime, just because they don't care about her. They call her the Virgin Tramp. There's just some horrible details, but as Jamie said, done in this kind of plain fashion.
Yeah, and that's the thing, when you're hearing these outlandish things, it's done in such a subtle way that it's still shocking, but in a way I think it rolls off of you too. And it's a strange thing to watch, actually. And I think that's where, for me, it was kind of the best parts of the movie, where that its subtle approach mixed well with the violent implications of everything. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could see it leaning into the more LA Confidential, full-on disgusting thriller. Like it could go with the action set piece version of some of these events if it wanted to, but it never does. It always plays it in this downbeat register of just like resigned, like a sigh. You're like, well,
and it's confident that way in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think this is the kind of movie where it's more fun to think and talk about than it is to watch, and maybe that's becoming clear in this conversation here. But, just to piggyback on what you guys were talking about, I think with Bruce, perhaps I'm psychoanalyzing him here a little bit, but I think maybe what attracted him to this film was that idea of a patina of normalcy being draped over depravity, which I think is what exists in this film. And it's what the film is talking about in relation to these two brothers, where, you have this terrible thing going on beneath the surface, but like, we're going to put this nice kind of thing on top of it that is going to obscure it. And I think that with Born in the USA in particular, that is a very relevant theme, because a big thing on that record to me is that the formula of the songs on that album it's basically, these are happy sounding songs with very bleak lyrics. Most of the lyrics on that record are just dealing like with very heavy subjects, but if you just listen to the music, it feels very upbeat and uplifting. And I think that was something that Bruce was really exploring at this time. And it's what makes the record, I think, such a interesting and complicated work of art, because whether you're talking about the title track, dealing with Vietnam veterans and how they're disaffected, or you have a song like Glory Days, which is about the emptiness of nostalgia, or, you've got My Hometown, which is about, the middle class being squeezed. You listen to the music and it's like, oh, this is just like a great pop record. But if that's as deep as you go, you miss a lot of things going on. So I just feel like that kind of connects to this film in a way, because I really think the movie's kind of looking at the culture of the 1940s and how you had all this ugliness going on, but people didn't really want to confront it. And this is a movie that's kind of throwing it in your face and then connecting it to the ugliness that was happening in contemporary culture in the late 70s and early 80s.
I think both brothers in their own way are dealing with that, because you have the De Niro character, obviously, as the Monsignor, who's dealing with it in the church, where you have this character, for example, of Seamus, played by Burgess Meredith, obviously Mickey in all the Rocky movies. Always nice to see him pop up in something, but he's one of the priests who's basically getting replaced for like not being a business savvy accountant. Like Desmond is, who, he's the one earning his bishop nomination, and, he's asked to do the dirty work of essentially firing this priest that he's not happy about. Because the priest is basically just like, I thought we were in the business of saving souls, and every day it seems more like I'm an employee of a construction company. He's saying it just basically, quite blatantly. But all of this is getting Desmond in the good graces of the cardinal, because these business deals and these sort of relationships are helping, actually, the church achieve some of its, sort of actual economic goals that it wants to reach, which is something that he's kind of, Desmond is conflicted about it, but he's under the belief that, the church's work is important, but how can we achieve our mission without power is kind of how he describes it. And then so the Duvall character comes in, and his whole deal is basically exposing this scandalous contradiction that everyone's dealing with, and he's not even above it or better than it. He admits that he's like a guy who has like taken bribes, and he's been part of it. I think he's just the idea of the dress up of that someone that they're doing, that is what is upsetting to him. He's that everyone's being dishonest about it. And we see that, I think, in the scene where he meets Jack at the fancy restaurant, where Des is kind of like whining and dining and political deal making for the church. And he straight up says, I used to work for you, when you were running Whores, I was your bag man. I did the Vice payoffs for the Madam before you started doing fundraisers for St. Veronica's. And the sort of the hypocrisy of this little pious show they all put on in public where he knows what their real business is. And it just makes him, Duvall becomes very smirkingly vindictive about exposing this, which, obviously he's, he realizes that it's kind of hurting his brother and it's hurting his brother's reputation to be doing all of this, and which he doesn't want to be doing. But, there's something kind of impulsive about the Duvall character that I like in that moment, because he does it and then he immediately regrets it. He's just like, man, I shouldn't have treated my brother that way. I know that my brother means well and he's trying to do good work, and, he still goes and visits like our mom together. And it sucks that, he golfs like a rich guy now, but like beyond that, he's still my brother.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. Basically, it seemed like he came from a more emotional place when that rage just kind of comes out of him in that moment. It doesn't feel like he's controlled in any way, shape, or form, especially compared to what we've seen him in the crime scenes, talking with a partner or Brenda. This is just kind of an unhinged moment for him, and I really took to that. I liked that a lot, and it is, I think, the first moment where I think Desmond's character in some capacity is seen in that way, because it's the first public moment for him where other people are looking at someone yelling corruption at somebody that he's working with. And of course, that is why Duvall feels guilty afterwards and everything. But I just think it's a cool moment to have, because it definitely plants the seed for what we're going to see later on.
Because Desmond start going, shit, maybe we should start divesting and disentangling ourselves from, the church from this guy, if he's going to, if public outbursts like these could take place, and, start using other businessmen and counselors to start buying stake in the hospitals and schools that he has a part of. And he has this very, he should have informed his brother about it, but he's basically like, okay, look, we are going to get rid of this guy, but before we do, we're going to give him a salutation dinner declaring him the Catholic layman of the year. And it's so funny because he's like, look, we're going to give him this as like a parting gift, like goodbye, we don't want to work with you anymore. But he doesn't tell Duvall about that, so Tom gets so upset.
It's an even worse scene.
Because he's so upset because, he's looking in on this like young murdered prostitute. He hunts down a Stag film that she was in, that one of the sort of Madam's girls was involved in. He traces them back to this like dead porno filmmaker, Leland Standard, who died in a suspicious car accident. So he's like, man, someone's trying to cover this up. He ends up getting her diary with the phone book with a phone book number in it, and it's Jack's number. And he's like, the Catholic layman of the year, the pillar of this community, was a rich pimp having sex with this like young prostitute who's been cut in half, you know? And so he's like, were you wearing this sash while you were banging? I think, this girl, he goes up to him and says in public, and that really starts to worry Jack. It starts to worry, his lawyer, played by Ed Flanders, and all these other characters who are basically like, we want your brother to back off this situation. Like, we give money to the church, your brother's going to back off. And they also actually threatened him to, at one point, they say, you were actually in the car the day we all met this hitchhiking girl.
Right.
And so, if this gets in the paper, your reputation's going to be ruined as well. And I think Duvall describes it as there's going to be a lot of red faces if this policeman does his duty. But he's stubborn, man. He's like, I'm going to do this duty, even if it ruins my brother's reputation.
Yeah, I think he said, what does he respond with? He's just like, I met her, I didn't fuck her, or something like that. But it is kind of shocking to see Desmond's character say something like that, just because he's had such a subtle presence this whole time. There's even a couple scenes, or one in particular that jumps to mind, where they show him just kind of reflecting and contemplating for a good minute, 2 minutes or something like that in his room as he's putting his stuff away. So he just has a real... It's very subtle, his character, and the way that De Niro portrays him, as we've already talked about. But yeah, so when he has certain lines that kind of jump out like that, they are a little shocking in some capacity. I do really like the scene where Tommy goes to Desmond in the confessional, I think that's where he apologizes to him.
Scene.
Yeah, and at first there's kind of a stubbornness to Duvall's character where he's just like, I curse a lot. I'm late to work or whatever he says. And and Desmond's just kind of like, oh yeah, is that all you do, that kind of thing. But I like that initial stubbornness and kind of almost that brotherhood that they share before he finally is just like, yeah, I'm sorry, I should try harder to keep this under wraps until we figure everything out. But again, I also think that there's a little bit of, his morality is that he wants justice, and he wants these people to be exposed. So the fact that he even has to apologize to his brother, even knowing that there's some corruption going on, I think he's also trying to fight. It's just it's a complicated situation for him, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Well, and speaking to Steven's point about this kind of feeling defeated or feeling a little bit sort of almost like deliberately kind of unsatisfying in a way, I think the most interesting element, because there's that first confession scene and it leads up to a sort of climactic confession sequence where Tom has been digging into the case further, and he essentially confirms that all of Desmond's friends who he suspects have murdered this woman, they might actually be innocent, and that the murder actually might have been this porno filmmaker who killed her before getting into the car accident, and so essentially it was a murder suicide functionally, and that he's not actually looking for a killer who's still alive. And he finds all this out by going to this abandoned sort of army barracks where they shoot the pornos. There's this gruesome blood trail in the sort of bathtub suggesting that, this is the series of events and how it might have went down. And there's something just so, I guess, kind of defeating about it being like the simplest answer of it being like kind of like they were like, we went to the porno guy's office to go confront him and found out he was dead in like the first like 40 minutes of the movie. And it's like, oh, there's no larger conspiracy. There is no like the big guy dragging the girl out of the car in Chinatown. Like there's no moment like that in this because, this case has technically already been solved. I don't need to do any more work. And he basically almost buys that until his sort of madam friend, Brenda, is found dead in this sort of apparent suicide. And they say that, the last person she called was Jack. And I don't know what she wanted, but clearly she didn't get it. And he's so upset by this that, like, even if they are innocent, there is like this pressure of that their reputations are going to be ruined if you bring this up. So we need to cover it up, even though they didn't do it. And he basically just goes, well, fuck that. Like he I think it's Jack goes to the confession booth for De Niro at one point. Yeah. And he's basically like, you need to get a hold on your brother. And then his brother comes into the confession booth on the other side. And he's just like, I'm picking Jack up and I'm giving you a warning. And I love that De Niro even goes, did he do it, Tommy? Like, are you going to arrest this guy because he actually did it and you think he did it? Or are you just arresting him because you are, this corrupt facade that exists upsets you? And he's like, I don't care. And I don't care if you go down with him. And De Niro gets his, I think, one really great moment where he really underplays the neither do I. Yeah. Which I wish I saw that dilemma more on him, like through the rest of the movie. But I do like that moment where he goes, I'm so upset about how corrupt I've become in a way that you should just take us all out, I
think also that I really love that moment too, because like we've said, his whole performance, it has that subtlety to it. And you're almost waiting for something that is kind of an explosion of emotion or some type of huge expression. And when the subtlety is built into that moment, I think that it turns into that just inherently because it's so defeated. Like it almost recontextualizes how he was portraying the whole thing. I think he was incredibly depressed and sad about what he was doing this whole time, rather than just being kind of, stoic about it or just kind of a blank face about it. I think once he gets to this point, you see that this whole time he's probably felt like this corruption isn't good, but he needs to get to that bishop position because with power, he can do good things. I think he says that earlier on in the film. He's like, we need power to actually accomplish these things. So yeah, that moment is just him finally going like, I'm totally defeated. And yeah, I agree. I think it's
I like the way that the film treats it. It's not like the shocking revelation. Yeah. It's not this like, it is just like almost this slow acting poison of corruption. Right. Totally. And it's like, I've got to this place. I've gotten myself to this place. And, I do wish maybe seeing the actual awful sort of, everyone going down due to the press had a little bit more impact. It kind of just goes right back into the wraparound section where you don't really see a whole lot of the fallout.
Just on the brothers, it seems like they're just kind of like, we know that these bad guys got in trouble. Now we're back to the melodrama.
But also, maybe that's what Bruce saw in it. He's like, look at this guy, this brother in desert exile, to an abandoned church in the prologue, which I do like the detail that it was also where they relocated the other nice priest, Seamus. And, this ending where it's like, Desmond is not bitter or unhappy about what happened in his life. He's like, I'm actually living probably how a priest should, not interested in construction deals. I should be out here just doing God's work every day. And he even goes, you were my salvation. You made me remember things, you were who I once was. And the last shot kind of startled me a little bit. It's them smiling and bonding in a crane shot over their shared family grave plot in the desert. It's kind of sweet, but in like a really bleak way.
Yeah, it's very much. I mean, yeah, it represents the movie well, I think.
Yeah,
everything does feel like these brothers have kind of died already. Like their lack of expression, given that there's the couple Duvall moments. Just feels as if they've, in a sense, given up, and all of this, the corruption, the death around them is just normal at that point. And
there's a weird comfort to the fatalism that circling back to our sort of Bruce Springsteen element here, it reminded me of one of my favorite lines in Nebraska, which is, everything dies, baby, that's a fact, but maybe everything that dies someday comes back. And in Atlantic City, it's referring to sort of reviving this sort of soured, cold love with this girl that he wants to run away with. But it also has like this doomed destination of like this guy, he's being forced into a life of crime because he has debts that no honest man can pay. So it encapsulates, I think, the central rewarding contradiction that Steven's been suggesting, which is that, Springsteen songs are always kind of a little woundedly romantic. It feels like there's hope and fantasy in there, but there's always that kind of dark class reality in some of the characters and the stories and that people are actually experiencing. So I think that ending did kind of it got to that place for me where it felt weirdly sweet and nice and about these two brothers, and you feel good for them in a way, but they're also bonding over the fact that we destroyed an entire community in LA and we're both going to die right here and
at least we
have our bodies buried right here, you know, and it's almost like this weird, like Ebert described it as a philosophical sigh. And I was like, yeah, that feels about right. But
that's pretty accurate. Yeah. No, agreed.
So if we are pivoting towards the reductive rating round, though, which for you, Stevens, where we remove all the words and all the nuance and we give the movie a rating between 1 and 5. I think for this ended up getting a very solid to kind of like high 3 territory for me is where it ended up. Because I do think that it is quite solid, and I like that, you know, I like Chinatown, I like James Ellroy. So the idea of like someone doing something in that realm, doing a sort of murderous noir conspiracy about LA construction tycoons and their relationship to the church and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And I do think there's some interesting writing detail from Dunn and Didion in there. I would have been curious to see how tortured the religious element would have got under a Paul Schrader. But again, Ulu Grosbard, not a bad director, so I'm not going to complain there. I do just think some of its elements are maybe a little bit undercooked, especially some of the thriller elements. But also I have to, you know, say that it feels deliberate. It feels like exactly what they're going for. They want it to be just this guilt-ridden sort of Catholic brother melodrama kind of, you know, around a noir story. And I think in that way, the film is fairly successful. I do like Duvall and De Niro in it, even if I think that there was room to maybe hit a little bit harder in some of the relationships. And I do think that, you know, for a morality drama designed to kind of get its leads Oscar nominations, it kind of ended up failing in that regard. It didn't actually give them the moments that they needed to get those nominations. But at the same time, I kind of respect that about it. You know, I kind of respect that this movie's played in a bit of a minor register.
It is funny to think De Niro, like if he got nominated, the reel would just be like So am I.
Neither do I.
Neither do I. That's it.
Yeah, but that's just it. I think the same qualities that make it a bit of an unsatisfying thriller do kind of work in its favor when it's just a simple story of a community being casually and openly defeated by this very greedy underbelly that it's trying to dress up. I think I can see what Springsteen saw in it and how it ended up maybe getting its way into some of the ways that he would downplay and underplay even some of the songs in Nebraska, especially in comparison to some of the other albums where he would get quite a bit bigger and more screamy about some of the songs. But and also the fact that the murder mystery itself is resolved in such a plain and underwhelming fashion honestly kind of made me chuckle a little bit. But it sort of made it interesting for the Duvall character to be like, I don't care actually who the murderer was.
I'm done.
Fuck all this shit. I'm burning it down. You know, that was sort of an interesting
You're all guilty
idea. So,
as far as I'm concerned.
Solid 3 for me.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a 3 as well. There is kind of this weird lack of urgency when it comes to the detective side of this plot, but it really is more focused on the melodrama between Duvall and De Niro, and which I think eventually really does become something good. And I do like the subtle performance that De Niro is giving off, and Duvall as well. I mean, Duvall has a couple more moments, but it's not like he really does pull back a lot in a purposeful way. And I think that works well, especially with the crime scenes. It's not as if Grosbard really, accents any of the violence that's happening. But I think that's also the point, where it's not showing it. It's showing these implicated, really gruesome crime scenes, and then having these detectives just be very nonchalant about it, just because they're so used to it. So I think the subtlety on both ends really works. And then when you get that moment with De Niro where he just gives up, I think that subtlety really, really works. And you have to wait for that moment for everything to kind of work in its full context. But it's very good. But it's a little bit plain, some of which is good and some of which is bad. So I think overall it does work though, and I do like that ending of them just kind of, it's like giving up on everything else except each other, I suppose. So 3 out of 5.
Yeah, for you, Steven.
Wow, I feel like I've just been listening to this podcast for the longest time. I feel like it's like been tumbleweed on my side of the podcast here. I've just been sitting back and I was cleaning my office here while you guys were talking. I don't know. I'll give it a 3. And you guys,
you're in the same boat. Look at this.
You guys can take it away
our guests on the show.
You guys can take it away for the next 20 minutes. I'll just kind of sit back in my hammock here and take a nap while you guys talk about the next movie.
Beautiful.
That's the way to do it sometimes.
Yeah. Take it away.
Hell yeah. Well, I think that will wrap it up for...
This is the easiest appearance. I don't even have to talk here. This is great.
I will say I will be a little sad if we don't bring up, well, they blew up the Chicken Man in Philly last night. I didn't have a chance to bring that up in anywhere, and I don't think it was inspired by this movie at all. But that lyric just I was listening to that song again today, so I was like, I was hoping it was in True Confession somewhere, but there was no Chicken Man. We won't know. But that's going to wrap it up for True Confessions here. We're going to be right back, and we're going to be talking about Light of Day next, so stick around.
Be forgiven.
No.
Michael J. Fox, Jenna Rowlands, Joan Jett in a Paul Schrader film, Light of Day.
Anybody want to rock and roll?
All right, we are back and we are talking Light of Day, the 1987 American rock and roll working class family melodrama written and directed by Paul Schrader, starring Michael J. Fox and an interesting bit of stunt casting that I think paid off. Joan Jett as Joe and Patty, two road trip bandmate siblings in a band called the Barbusters, whose dreams of stardom are kind of crushed by various realities and responsibilities back home in Ohio. And also Gina Rowlands and Jason Miller are in here. has their religious conservative parents. Definitely something Paul knows a thing or two about. This is our, doing the math here, 4th time talking about Mr. Schrader, film critic turned tortured writer, director, having previously talked about a few of his directed movies. We did his sex-crazed MTV era remake of Jacques Turner's Cat People. We did his masterpiece and one of the greatest filmed biopics and just works of art about an artist in general, Mishima, which obviously, you know, took Yukio Mishima's meticulous views of beauty and aesthetics and self-destructive obsession and male, you know, fascination with male body and, you know, and right-wing extremism and all of that, and turned it into this like expressionist dream. Essentially, it's a really amazing film. But he's also come up a few other times because we've talked about his pulpier scripts, like for Rolling Thunder. We've talked about his scripts for the Yakuza, for Taxi Driver. Anyway, we love Paul Schrader on the show. We have talked about him many times, and all his wonderful riffs on Pickpocket and The Man in the Room. I don't think we've done American Gigolo or Light Sleeper yet.
No,
but
we did Hardcore, which was fun.
We did. Yes, I was gonna say the last time we were talking about him, God's Lonely Man was Hardcore, which was this movie about a conservative sort of Midwest religious father, played by George C. Scott, who goes on this Searchers-esque odyssey into the sordid underworld of pornography in California, and looking, you know, for his abducted or runaway sort of teenage daughter who's making porno films or maybe snuff films he's worried about in this black market underground. And so Porn Industry Searchers was the movie, which is hilarious.
It would have been really funny for this movie to become Gina Rollins trying to find Joan Jett on a rock and roll odyssey.
It was pretty close. There's some elements that are there, because I mean that's the one thing. Like it was a very silly premise, but it was also clearly a very personal one. Like I felt like he was getting some real pain and some demons out. And anyone unfamiliar with that sort of like history of his life, you know, he's not just like a weird guy in a room thinking about using a gun. He's not a weird religious loner for no reason, you know. Like there's a reason this has made it into so many of his films and so many of his characters. I would recommend checking out some of the biographies on him and his brother, who were physically abused by their religious sort of fanatic Calvinist parents. And they eventually fled to college, where he was able to watch movies in art houses and sort of grindhouses for the first time. But, you know, they were, you know, I think his brother talks about being like whipped and like pierced with sharp objects, like very old school God-fearing hellfire punishment kind of stuff. And there's even a bit where he talks about like, you know, parts of the elements of Travis Bickle came from what him and his brother were doing, that they became fascinated with guns. They were like putting, you know, guns underneath their pillows at night because they were so afraid. And there's some pretty fucked up stuff in there. And, you know, a lot of that got translated into his movies. Affliction, the Russell Banks adaptation that he did, is maybe the grimmest version you can see of him dealing with sort of like repressive family members. But it does crop up a little bit here in The Parents, in Light of Day, a movie that, as Steven has said, is the least Paul Schrader movie that Paul Schrader ever Paul Schradered. If you were to show this to someone as like, this is what Paul Schrader movies are like, they would be like, what? like all right, like this is a weird detour movie. It comes right between Mishima and right between Patty Hearst, and it is in a more accessible kind of mainstream Hollywood film. The script was again, it was not just Bruce Springsteen inspired. He wrote it as a star vehicle for him when Springsteen was thinking about getting into movies. So Springsteen almost became Elvis. Did that really almost happen?
I mean, I don't know how close Bruce actually came to being in this movie. My feeling is that it wasn't that close, really, because I think Bruce was always going to be someone who wanted to be in control of his own projects, and Paul Schrader was obviously going to be the auteur of this film, and there was going to be a conflict with that. It is interesting, though, to think about, like, if Bruce had been in this movie and it had been made closer to the time that Schrader wrote it, like he wrote it in the late 70s. So, like, if Bruce had been in this movie and it was the movie, like, after
it was
Blue
like
Collar.
Blue Collar era Schrader.
Yeah, and, like, would Bruce have been Paul Schrader's muse? Like, would he have been in like other projects? Like, would he have been?
He would have been
Richard
sick
Gere
in a blue collar era Schrader, like with hanging out with Richard Pryor and Harvey Keitel, like just trying to like rob the Union. Bruce Springsteen absolutely could have been another character.
Or if
in that
he was
movie.
like Richard Gere, if he was like the Richard Gere character in American Gigolo, or
I could see that too,
that kind of thing. Or, but yeah, I don't think it was ever really going to be something that Bruce did, but. You know, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why they flirted with it, though, right? Because they both do share a kind of lonely, dirty, especially at the time for Schrader, that would have been like he was very working class oriented. He was very, like, a lot of his characters were veterans. There was a lot of sort of like male kind of malaise running through their, through some of the American history elements and the class elements. And I can absolutely see why, Schrader would have at least been interested in Springsteen, if maybe not as much the reverse.
Yeah, I think that they both had shared interests in like what they were interested in writing about that at that time, for sure.
And then Bruce stole the title, and that was that. He was like, you know what?
Yeah,
you have a great idea for the title of a song and for an album. But he had to have had no idea it was going to be that big, and then he'd have to be like, well, I guess, because he ends up contributing the title song to this movie as well. But it does kind of feel like thanks, Paul. Like here's a little, sorry that I took the title for your movie and it became the biggest song ever.
Yeah, and just the moment in time that this movie comes out, it is interesting as a snapshot of like post Born in the USA, like middle American rock. I mean, this movie takes place in Cleveland. You have this band, the Bar Busters. There is that bar band sort of milieu of like the E Street Band. There's a little bit of that, but there's also a lot of hair metal going on at the same time. And it does align like with what was going on in music in the late 80s, like where you had like this sort of leftover heartland rock of the mid 80s that was morphing into like more of a Bon Jovi type thing that was going on like by 86, 87. And you definitely get that vibe.
Also on the soundtrack of the movie.
Watching this movie. And so for me watching it and writing the book, that was part of the interest in watching the movie, was not only because Bruce has a connection to this movie, sort of a tangential connection to it, but also how it indirectly documents like how music had changed from the mid 80s to the late 80s. Which I think is really
absolutely.
interesting.
And this also fits into, there was a trend in the 80s for specifically these kind of working class, like teen rebel, sort of like punk rock coming of age movies. By total happenstance, there was a teen girl rebel series that just screened here in Toronto on a bunch of like rare 35 millimeter prints. So I got to see a movie called Foxes by Adrienne Lyne, which is a young Jodie Foster, and also Cherry Curie of The Runaways is like the co-lead. And so they're like skipping school together, going to concerts, doing drugs, and they're incorporating the real sort of like concert footage and some of the performances and some of the actual like punk girls into the movie. And then there was this other one called Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains, which came out a couple years later with a very young Diane Lane and Ray Winstone, who's the singer of like a Clash inspired act. And there's some great songs by Paul Cook and Steve Jones of the Sex Pistols in that movie. So there was in the 80s like a...
But that's like a little bit earlier though. I think those movies like were more early 80s. Like with this movie, I almost feel like River's Edge, that movie.
Yes.
That has a similar vibe to this. I think River's Edge is a much better movie than Light of Day, but it's a similar type thing where and those are like younger characters in that movie, but there is more of that kind of disaffected middle American, like a lot of people with mullets walking around, like that whole thing.
Yeah.
I almost feel like that could be a good companion in a way with Light of Day. Although again, I think River's Edge is a much better movie than this.
Yeah,
Tim
but it was
Hunter,
it was just
filmmaker.
cool that like the movies were they wanted to bring musicians into the fold. They kind of wanted, so it was interesting to see Joan Jett, which was more in the era that those movies were coming out in. Like her peak stuff was more in the sort of like early 80s, and it felt like it was she was partially maybe some inspiration for the girl punk rocker trend that the movies were kind of taking up on. So it was interesting to see Paul Schrader get in on that. Although apparently he didn't seem like he was crazy about the casting of either lead, and he kind of just went with it because the studio wanted to do it.
I think the screenplay that like he had written when it was called Born in the USA and Bruce was going to be in it, it was two brothers. It wasn't like a brother and a sister. And I don't know who would have been. I mean, I don't know if like Bruce would have been the Michael J. Fox character or the Joan Jett character, but I mean, clearly this was a movie where Schrader cast Michael J. Fox because he was a huge star at the time. And I don't know if he's necessarily the best actor to cast in the movie. He's not a very rock and roll type guy, even though, he obviously plays guitar in Back to the Future and that whole thing. But, he's got like a very big mullet in this movie.
Yeah, the blue collar factory worker reading Penthouse and putting his dirty feet up on the table. I don't know. It's the most authentic coming from TV.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like a role
star Michael J. Fox.
It does feel like like Matt Dillon would have been. I feel like a great person to cast in that role. If you're thinking of like 80s actors that would have been in that age range, it seems like he would have been maybe a more ideal person. But Michael J. Fox, I'm sure, was someone who, if you cast him, it was going to make the movie financed. I'm sure that was a thing that made this movie possible to be made. I mean, I'm really intrigued by Paul Schrader being attracted to this material because and this is something I read.
So I was like, this is him.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I read about in the book. I mean, with Paul Schrader, he makes man in a room films about solitary figures who are divorced from a community that end up lashing out. Like that is his formula, whether it's Taxi Driver, whether it's First Reformed. I mean, he's remade this movie many times, Light Sleeper. It's the movie he makes over and over again. And like, this is not that movie. And it's really interesting that he would have thought of Springsteen in this type of role, because Springsteen, I think, is someone who is also attracted to like man in a room type narratives. I mean, like Darkness on the Edge of Town, Nebraska, even like elements of Born in the USA. He's very attracted to loners who are disaffected and sort of divorced from like a larger world. And like he always writes about like the importance of community and like how if you're part of a community, that's like what grounds you and like makes you sane, essentially. But he's also written about people who are outside of that and like the ramifications of like not being part of a community. Like Springsteen would have been someone who would have been more suitable to play like a Travis Bickle type character than like the Michael J. Fox character in this movie, even though Bruce Springsteen obviously is a musician, but like, I don't know, this movie, I mean, maybe it would have made sense with Springsteen if it was like two brothers, which is how Schrader originally wrote it, and then you can kind of fit it into...
It's always two brothers with him, man. He loves that two brothers relation. He does it in Affliction as well with the Nick Nolte, Willem Dafoe. He loves younger brother and older brother.
Schrader and thing. Springsteen, they're both, I think, drawn to that sort of biblical type story structure of Cain like the good brother and the bad brother, and like that is a metaphor for like the duality of man, like the two sides of an individual and like how they're at war. You have these two brothers and they represent like the two sides of every person. I mean, I think Springsteen is also attracted to that. But like in this movie, because it's like Michael J. Fox and Joan Jett, there is like a good and bad type thing going on, but it's like not quite the same dynamic. Because
it's kind of drawn in this very accessible kind of family drama, melodrama kind of fashion, and I don't think that's necessarily bad, and I do think that the performances are quite strong enough to be moving like across the board. But similarly, I think to True Confessions, it's a surprisingly low key kind of restrained affair for Schrader, who is like not the guy which I guess you can't say that he hasn't been restrained before, but I guess maybe his characters feel like they're bursting from the restraints of his construction.
This is strange in the sense that
it's not quite that.
It's like
a small scale affair.
Yeah, a lot of the characters that he writes, it's kind of like they're going deeper and deeper and deeper until that kind of that ultimate expression happens. Whereas this one feels like, you get a little deeper into the scene, but then you have to constantly circle back to the family stuff. So there's this like in and out quality of what you're normally used to with Schrader. Like what I would think that he would focus on, 90% of the film would be Joan Jett's road adventures while touring and kind of, neglecting her family and all of that. But instead, you mostly have a lot of it, honestly, is both a balance between Fox and her going back and forth between the familial stuff and the dreams of being a musician and how difficult it is.
And also the low level dreams of being a musician, which I love. Definitely, it's not about a band who's even dreaming about like making it big. Like they want to play successful bar shows.
Yes,
and they want to set up a local tour. They're dealing with the realities that a lot of small bands do. Apparently, a lot of these were documentary detail that Schrader acquired, embedding himself with some small like local bands for a few weeks.
There's a couple moments, specifically one that happens. I think in the beginning and in the middle where they're playing and you almost think like just due to the quality of how it's playing, the kind of the energy they're giving off that they're going to be playing in front of, hundreds of people. And then they cut to the bar and it's like 3 people barely paying attention at the bar itself. And and I've myself, just speaking on personal experience, I've definitely been there. So it was really interesting to just watch this kind of, it's like, here's the energy, here's the performance, here's that larger than life aspect of it, and then here's the reality, here's what that is playing in front of. And I think that's great. And there's a couple moments in that I'll get to when we get to them. But it's I love those the small dreams. It's like, I just wish 150 people would show up. They're not trying to sell out arenas. They're just trying to make their grocery money. And it's great.
I'd like to replace working at the factory with like funds that we make, with the band, essentially. Exactly. And I like that all of this detail of this like small, sort of like local band culture is basically just used as an excuse for the other part of the film craft a cathartic narrative essentially around the idea of young punk rock kids who have become estranged from their religious parents, and they hit the tour bus as a way to kind of vent, and eventually they kind of have to find their way back home and find some sort of semblance of sort of grace and forgiveness despite all the sort of messy emotional harm that the characters might do to each other. And that's the most like Schrader-esque element of it, is like coming back and circling around to that kind of graceful quality despite the more punk elements that do crop up throughout the film. But I like both Michael J. Weirdly, I end up kind of liking Michael J. Fox in this. I don't think that he's right for it on the page, like on paper. You cast him, I'm like, he doesn't make sense for that role. But I could also see that he's like committed to it. This time specifically, he was very interested in darker, more dramatic material, and like this was one of the examples, which is funny when you think about it, because he's like, I'm gonna make a Paul Schrader movie that's dark as fuck, and then he makes the lightest, like kind of fluffiest like Paul Schrader movie that's been made,
and he plays the most like morally driven character in that sense, where he's
the kind of like family mediator who wants everyone to get along. Yeah, he's like kind of like the nicest Paul Schrader character that has ever been written.
Definitely.
Which is, but I mean, like, he was also around this time, I think he was like a year or two away from doing Brian De Palma's Vietnam War film, Casualties of War.
Oh, okay.
Which is, I think he's fantastic in that movie.
And that uses his like kind of clean image and innocence really well too.
The boyish qualities are a plus that De Palma knew how to really weaponize, because it's such a brutal whiplash with the horrible things that he's obviously bearing witness to and like coming forward against, with the sort of military court and Sean Penn sort of like leading a very, you know, brutal rape. And so for the Michael J. Fox character to the boyish quality, you're like, oh no, why is Michael J. Fox being put through this? And whereas this one, I am a little bit just like, you know, he's just a nice boy. He's trying to keep his family
nice
together.
Boy that likes rock and roll, I guess. Like he does come off as someone that's like almost just playing the part of, you know, kind of badass rocker, but you know, every moment he has in this shows that he has.
It's a switch, though. It's not his life. It's not like for Joan Jett. She has this monologue in it at one point where it's like it's a really important thing for her, that this is, you know, what she does and it's who she is. And you just see this with the Michael J. Fox character. You can just see there's a little bit more of a realistic, like, you know, his larger dream is not to, like, music's part of his dream, I think he says, but like it's not like the dream. Like he would just like a nice life. He would like to settle down with a girl. He would like to be with his family. He would like to make money. And whether that's, maybe like making dinner trays at some assembly line sort of like factory, or, I mean, some of the other band members too. One of the band members works at the jeans store, which I was like, I don't know what that is, but I mean, I guess they sell jeans. One of them is like a guy who's still in school, who's just like doodling at his desk. There's a lot of authentic working class detail. To even just the way that this cross cuts. And I like that it merges those two things. Like you have that opening montage of, you get these industrial shots of Ohio, but then it's cross cut with, you know, J. Fox and his mullet and Joan Jett rocking the Bruce Springsteen written title song, Light of Day. Also at a bar, I don't know if you guys noticed, with the young Michael Rooker, who runs the bar. They do not pay attention to him at all, but I had to go back. I was like, that's definitely Rooker. Michael Rooker. There he is running the bar.
It's
the
wild.
Ukes or whatever it is.
It's absolutely wild. And I guess, you know what, just the last thing, just speaking on that innocence that Michael J. Fox has, it kind of now works, just given that his character does go in and out of it. It really isn't his life. So him playing Rockstar almost makes sense for his character. I don't know if that's purposeful, but it just, maybe it's a happy accident in a way.
Yeah, the character is not living it the same way that the Joan Jett character is, and she
Joan
is,
Jett, as we know, is a rock star.
And also, Schrader apparently expressed in retrospect that he wasn't like super happy about the the casting, and he's not sure that he liked shooting with Joan Jett. He had no issues with her. He's not sure the movie totally worked, and I actually kind of thought that she was great. I actually liked the way that, I mean, obviously she commands the showmanship of the stage during those sequences, which were all shot live and in like actual bars on location, which, by the way, also with like, you know, they went to settings where they didn't tell people that they were going to be watching like Joan Jett and Michael J. Fox play. So
that's cool. That is so cool.
And she was obviously famous enough that people knew, but apparently Michael J. Fox actually got away with it a couple times where they were just like, yeah, that's just some guitar player who plays for Joan Jett.
That's awesome. And I do like that, you know, you get Joan Jett and you actually have real recordings of her voice doing the live shows and everything. So it's nice. It's probably not live, but it's just to have that authentic voice is great. And to be honest, there is one song that eventually Michael J. Fox sings with Benji, his nephew, Joan Jett's son in the movie. And it's really good. I actually really liked the tune, and Michael J. Fox can hold it. So hats off to him on that one.
There you go. Michael J. Fox, should he have had a music career? We'll talk about that.
He might have tried. I wonder if we dove into that, he might has an album out somewhere.
Yeah. But no, I like the relationship the two actors have. I think that her anger and her frustration about the family and the home life is very felt. You know, she's not just good for the actual sort of like musical performances, which she obviously is good at. And yeah, I think they get the family stuff right. Like both are estranged from their conservative religious parents who don't approve of, you know, the rock and roll hobby, the alternative lifestyle. One is Jeanette, played by Gina Rowlands, who had spent the 70s delivering obviously some of the most heartbreakingly raw domestic drama performances for her husband and co-star John Cassavetes. Shadows, Opening Night, Faces, A Woman Under the Influence, amazing movies, performances. But also Jason Miller, goddamn, as the dad Ben. He doesn't get much to do in the movie, but his scenes, the last scenes that he get, I was feeling quite sad for him on this watch, because it was a second watch for me. He's obviously known for being Father Karras in the Exorcist films primarily, but Rollins. I mean, what else can you say about Rollins? She's so good at, in the early scenes, especially making those passing comments that like sound like a loving and cheering mother, but they're coded to have like that guilt of like, that, you know, during Grace at dinner, she's like, we particularly ask for you to pay special attention to Patty, God, and forgive the sins of her youth, like dropping out of school and getting pregnant by a stranger and having this kid. And, you know, she's just like, I can't be in this house with my mother. I'm going back to the bar and the arcade, and we're going to just play music, and we're going to get all this out of our system, which, you know, I think it's a great dynamic, because it ends up working. It ends up being like, you get these family moments, and you see how, you know, the more sort of sad and, you know, sometimes pathetic sort of conditions that these characters live in and experience, especially some of the things they have to do for money. And then you just see her venting it by like delivering like a great performance of like, this means war, you know, which is like maybe one of the standout Joan Jett performances she gets to give in the movie. Yeah,
absolutely. I think I like their dynamic together. I think they show a pretty loving relationship, and there's a lot of support that doesn't come off as like completely corny or anything like that. I do really like Michael J. Fox's relationship with her son, Benji. He plays off like a really good, he's trying his best kind of father figure in the midst of all this just kind of chaos and lack of resources. Honestly, that's the big part of it, is that they're just poor and they're just trying their best to get the next paycheck.
Oh my God. Yeah. One of my favorite details about this movie is that they do a home invasion to steal someone's tools. Yeah. That seems like a weird thing to steal, right? You know, so they can afford a PV mixer. I was trying to figure this out. I was like, this is a very interesting heist plot. This is like a heist plot that actual Cleveland people would do, I feel like, which was what was kind of funny about it. I was like, they're going to steal some tools to pay for a mixer.
A PV mixer, yeah.
I don't know. There was just something very funny about that. And especially too, how little like they end up stealing from like the brother-in-law of one of Joe's coworkers, played by Thomas G. Waits, Fox from the Warriors, actually, speaking of last week, the guy that the actor Walter Hill hated and killed off in the movie. But yeah, he immediately is like, yeah, dude, we know your car, man. It's a small town. Like we saw you guys staking out the house, so give us back our $600 worth of tools. And he ends up having to go to the mother to like, you know, to get a loan to pay that money back. And it's the first of many scenes where Patty gets like very reckless in this very small scale kind of sad way, and Joe's the one who needs to be responsible, sorting out what to do about it logistically. And like, they could have just went and borrowed money from their mother in the first place, but now he has this whole like, now his friends know that they were so desperate that they were stealing from them. And it's this there's this I think the character even says, you know, you've got family loyalty, too bad your family ain't worth it, or something like that, you know. And you know, that feels like it could have been a Springsteen line.
How did you feel about the way that they deal with Joan Jett's kind of balance between, you know, trying to be a good mother and a good person, trying to be this successful musician, but also having to survive? Because there's a lot of, which some of the scenes I understand, because I get where Fox's character's coming from, where he's just like, you shouldn't use your child in the midst of all this, because, you know, it just seems wrong in that sense of
like when she gets him to steal the steak, you mean?
Yeah, stuff like that. But then too, it's, I think his big thing is like, if you get in trouble, this kid doesn't have a mother. But then at the same time, of course, she's dealing with the fact that she has to try to survive and actually feed the child and that. And I was wondering if you felt they balanced it well, because I think they could have focused a little more on Joan Jett's, just, I guess, her motivations. Like, you understand them, but I would have liked her to articulate it a little bit through more conversation. She almost comes off as like, because there's not a lot of scenes, there's a lot of scenes where she leaves Benji. And it just, I think without having a firm back and forth between the two, she comes off as like really negligent sometimes, to a I don't know, to kind of a fault that I don't know if the movie's necessarily trying to do. I'm not totally sure. So I was just curious.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Yeah.
One part that really I thought was a little too much, and maybe it's supposed to be again, but I don't know if I was reading it correctly, was when Michael J. Fox is kind of scolding her for the stealing of the meat and using Benji to do it. But then he jumps, and at first I'm like, you know what? Yeah, you probably shouldn't do that. And then he jumps and he's like, what's next? You're going to put him on the street and like sell him off? And I'm like, whoa.
Yeah, no, he specifically says, dude, like, I hear kiddie porn is like big these days or something. Or
like,
and I was like,
jumping it up a notch.
Yeah, my note here, Jamie, on that line is, whoa.
I think mine might be very similar.
Yeah, because I was like, yeah, he definitely goes. And I mean, I do think it has like more focus on the Michael J. Fox character than like an unfair focus for sure. A little like bit. I do think that it kind of moves away from, and I naturally gravitate towards having, you know, like a lot of sympathy for someone who's like a single mom trying to figure their shit out. So I still feel a lot for her, but definitely there is like this element of, you know, as soon as they hit the road, and because I think it's Joe gets, you know, laid off from the factory, and they have a yard sale, and they're like, we're going to go play all across Illinois. And you know, they're negotiating their rates with the one bartender who's like, you know, you might be big in Cleveland, but around here you're warm snot. And he's just like, Jesus Christ. And, you know, then they're playing these bar shows for like $125 a night and getting like free drinks, and they're staying in crummy motels, and they're essentially only making about $50 a week each after the expenses of the the food and the lodging and the gas and everything like that. So to cheer everyone up, she decides to steal some steaks from a Flint, Michigan sort of like grocery store. And, you know, she's using Benji to stuff it in. And I do like the detail where the kid's like, it's cold, you know, as they're trying to like get away. And, you know, it's definitely a moment where the Michael J. Fox character is being like, you know, your kid needs to go to school. Like, your kid has other concerns. You can't just like live this rocker lifestyle. And so, you know, he thinks that she's neglecting the kid and taking him on tour, basically like a suitcase to be lugged around. And, you know, and she does get the moment where she's like, you know, I'm not the best mother, but I do love him. And, you know, and I'm a good singer, and I'm so full of love, and I don't know how to, you know, express these things. And I don't, you know, I think she also describes too as having the kid because it was something that it would be hers, and it would not be her mother's. And so she doesn't want it, like, she doesn't want Benji like staying with the Gina Rowlands character. And
we'll get to it. But when we find out a very specific detail, you can also understand why, you know, she's been thrown into this situation. You know, this was not anywhere close to planned, and it's quite harrowing once we find out what happened. But I think it recontextualizes kind of why she would also be this way in some sense.
Yeah, well, and she's also trying to force it to work in the way that the other band members are kind of already giving up before she does. Like, one of the band members, after they watch the Fabulous Thunderbirds play a show, it's Boo, played by Michael McKean, or Mr. Green in Clue, or David St. Hubbins, and This Is Spinal Tap, for any Spinal Tap heads. But he basically expresses that he's like already disillusioned, you know, after just like a couple weeks on the road. He's like, I didn't realize we'd be making $50 a week. And he's like, I kind of want to go back to the plant. I've heard they've reopened the plant. And also he's like, and I could still play music by being part of like a local lounge act, which she views as like being a complete sellout and like not artistic at all. Even though they do, as a result, do a sick jazz rendition of This Means War, which I thought was kind of funny, which plays over all of them going back to the factory too. I was like, you know, going to war, going to the factory, baby. But so Patty decides she's going to join like a metal group, and she's going to, you know, let them all go home. And so Joe's the one who goes home to be a surrogate father for Benji. And, you know, she is very upset. She's very upset about that. She's very like, it's embarrassing that I need to have like my brother take care of my kid, but also you're becoming exactly like our parents. You know, you want to tell me what to do. You're the man, and I'm against the man because I'm rock. You know, very, you know. And but I do wish at this split in the movie we did spend a little bit more time with her and saw her, you know, being able to live the life that she would live without a kid or something. I feel like we don't get as much joy and as much attention paid to that what she wants out of all of this, the same way that we do like Joe being back home and dealing with the mundane qualities of like watching baseball with dad and washing dishes with mom and getting the first ideas of the fact that, you know, the mother, Gina Rowland's character, is confused and maybe has sort of like undiagnosed dementia. We eventually find out there's some cancer in there as well. And, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just think because it's got that hyper focus on basically Michael J. Fox's character being a father figure. It just, that's how he's seen eventually, because they just don't have as much balance as I think they should between Joan Jett coming back and forth. Benji calls him
dad, and he's like, "No, I'm Uncle Joe."
which you know, like you saying that it is built into the movie in that way. It just feels like I'm missing a little bit of the pieces from Joan Jett's storyline, so that I can understand this neglect a little more, even though you know, overall you disagree with it. You think a parent should take care of their child, but I just think that, you know, with more scenes of her playing, with more scenes, maybe even of her enjoying the spotlight, but then also struggling with the fact that she can't see him, something. It just felt a little disconnected from the home life that Michael J. Fox's character is doing.
Yeah, there's some balancing qualities I think Schrader could have worked out, but that might also be because the story changed when he gender flipped the character, and that maybe there wasn't supposed to be a single mom element to it when he originally wrote it too. Maybe, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But it does eventually kind of coalesce into, I think, a final third that really works, because it feels like the stuff that Schrader really wanted to get to the whole time. You know, like there's some nice scenes throughout. Like, I do like J. Fox going back to the plant. I do like, you know, where he's teaching the kid how to, you know, come up with lyrics and come up with their first song, which is the "You've got no place to go, so why don't you stay with me," which they sing over top of the image of like the father praying at one point, which is a nice touch, I thought. But eventually, you know, they find out the mother's really sick and, you know, she's probably going to die. And Patty is on the road with a metal band with fucking face paint on, and she's living this entirely separate, you know, other life where music is all that matters. 1 hour on stage makes up for the other 23. I've been living by an idea, rock and roll. And, you know, she does put on some wonderful sort of, you know, clips of performance shows that we see. Also, by the way, a young Trent Reznor also shows up in this. I was a little surprised by that. His band, The Exotic Birds, play a brief section in the background of one of these scenes, and I was like, is that Trent Reznor setting up the keyboard right there? What the fuck is going on? So it was cool to see that. But all of these shows are going on, and the Michael J. Fox character goes to Joan Jett and is basically like, you know, he has to inform her that their mother is dying, and you have to come back and you know, actually talk to her and interact with her. And, you know, we do get a really nice moment where Joan Jett very kindly distracts her while the nurse is like putting the IV in. And we get some of the details about the Reverend Ansley character, who is trying to say that Patty is like whispering in her ear, trying to strip your mother of her faith. You know, she doesn't care about family, and I fight her influence, and your mother's mind is weak, and she's trying to get revenge. And we do find out, obviously, he's more interested in hiding the fact that he's Benji's father, and he took advantage of a young girl, and that's why you know, the Joan Jett character never got the abortion. But I will say, I think the scene of the movie, and both of them nail it, is the Gina Rowlands and Joan Jett sequence, that slow zoom where Patty reveals where she's, you know, she keeps saying, you know, your father is a good man, but he's very lonely, and I want you to encourage him to remarry. I even have these women in mind for him. And she basically says, you know, I knew that you were the strong one. I almost died giving birth to you, and I never believed any of the terrible things anyone ever said about you. And
I love you the most. That kind of thing.
You're a mother now too, and it's not always easy, is it? You know, have I said or done anything as a mother that, you know, can't be forgiven, or that you don't think that I regret? And it's just wonderful moment of, you know, the two mothers kind of reckoning with this thing that's been hanging between them their entire lives. And then the most Schrader detail, though, is I want you to join me in heaven and say that you'll be there on her deathbed, trying to convert her non-believing child, which is an insane gesture and so raw and so real that I I was like, this could have only come from a man who actually had an interaction like this or something. I was like, that's such a crazy thing to do.
Or just understands that kind of faith. Like I grew up Catholic, and the devout Catholics in my family, especially the older ones, honestly, anytime I've been at a funeral, they view it more as like it's almost like a beautiful thing, like an ascension or a transcendence. You can have your opinion on that, of course.
I am not dying without my knowing that my kid is going to believe in God and come to heaven with me.
Yeah. So I found this scene to be incredibly heavy. And I thought it worked really, really well, especially just because the thing that they do well in this, given Joan Jett's character, is the stuff between her and the mother. Although they only have those few scenes, they're very powerful, and you can just feel the tension and the past with them. I think they do a great job. So when you get this scene and it all just comes together, it's a lot to handle. And I also love that Jett's character decides to say yes just in that moment, whether she believes it or not. It's just the kindest gesture that she could possibly give to her mother at that moment. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. There's also a subtle line that I don't know if it means much of anything, but it felt like she couldn't quite say it, where she says, she apologizes for how she acted in the past regarding certain things. And Patty just responds with, "It's in the past, Mom," rather than "yes" or "I forgive you." And it still seems like she's holding on to a little bit of it. And I think Joan Jett's performance gives that off as well. So yeah, I just found this scene to be full of nuance and complications, and I really liked how it all. I mean,
it helps that it's being performed by Gina Rowlands,
who's just like she's so good.
It's a pretty. You could give that woman anything, and she would make turn into like a harrowing moment of generational history that you're reckoning with, And so to have Schrader's actual, sort of like Catholic abusive family hangups and merge it with that, it's a strangely powerful moment in an otherwise, kind of light movie about characters figuring out if they can turn rock and rolling in Cleveland into an actual workable profession, or if they need to keep working at the plant, which has its own dark details to it, but it's not quite the same. It's not like the Jason Miller character being like, "She's dead, what am I going to do now?" and then just crying and hugging Michael J. Fox.
The Factory, although it's work that they don't want to do, when Michael J. Fox has those scenes in that factory, it doesn't seem like he's having the worst time. He's just kind of like, I'd rather be somewhere else. You know what I mean? He's still kind of got that Michael J. Fox pep in his step a little bit.
If he could be comfortable financially and do the lounge act shit, he'd be totally fine. And he had a girlfriend. He has a couple girlfriends throughout the film. None of them quite work out. Although he has a weird comment about how like none of them are like Joan Jett essentially, and I was like, that's an interesting way of phrasing that.
That is weird. That is a little strange. Yeah, I do. Also, the last detail I like about the hospital bed scene is when she goes out and she's basically tells her dad that she'll see her now, kind of thing, like she has something to say to you. But then she just kind of beelines and ignores Fox for the first time, and it felt like it was a moment for just her, like something that she didn't have to share with the person that has been on her side this whole time. It was like that was actually between me and Mom, and I like that too. So
yeah, lots of good stuff. But then of course, it's got to end on Patty skipping the mother's funeral and the Barbusters reunion show to play at an arcade. And, you got to get that Hollywood moment where Michael J. Fox goes, I used to worship you in your black leather jacket, and now you're going to like quit on us. And obviously they're going to, start the show, and he's going to be the one singing the Bruce Springsteen song, Light of Day, which apparently Springsteen used to play as like the closing act song for concerts for quite a while too, which I thought was a sort of a bit of a neat thing there. Is that true, Steven? How long did he make that his closing act song?
I'm not aware of that it being a closing act song. I mean, he's played that song live, but I don't know if it was a closing song.
Interesting. That was what I read, but it could have also been incorrect. But it's cool that he still kept it in kind of the repertoire, and also that Michael J. Fox sang it at one point, because there they are, Michael J. Fox and Joan Jett rocking out Bruce Springsteen's song right at the end of the movie, and that's the credits. That's it. You know, they're just like they're gonna keep music in their life, and the family's back together. But you do have a feeling that they've kind of settled, that they are they're gonna stay at home. If we are pivoting once again towards the reductive rating round on this one was also a solid to kind of high 3. It kind of grew on me a little bit more the second time. The first time I kind of felt similar to Steven, where I was like, this is the least Paul Schrader movie I've ever seen. And then the second time I watched it, I was picking up on more. I was like, you know what? There's a little Paul Schrader in here. Never mind. Hold on. You know, I see it. That finale is straight up. I see it. That could have easily been something that happened in Hardcore. It could have been something that happened in Affliction. You know, it's a little bit more of like the kinder version of it, and a little bit more of a graceful version of it than I think you would see in some of his heavier, darker kind of movies, where the main characters are a little bit more violent. But I do think that there's something about seeing some of Schrader's isms like that packaged into something a little bit peppier, a little bit, or maybe peppier is not even the right word, 'cause it's not like the most energetic movie ever or anything, but a little bit poppier, a little bit more, naturalistic, because this was even shot by his cinematographer, John Bailey, who had shot Mishima. And like, I mean, that's a movie where the formal craziness of that movie, the way that it switches between like classical sort of like Japanese eras to the more like colorfully surreal and imaginative sort of decadent stuff, to the political thriller stuff of the coup day, almost like a historical thriller or something. This is a very grounded and plain, kind of less subjectively shot kind of movie, but there's some elegance to it. There's a great oneer from them leaving the snowy car and going into one of the shows at one point, and even if it's toned down, I think that it's toned down in a way that suits just the location shooting. Like, going around Cleveland, going into these real working class places, embedding himself with the actual bands and the sort of dirty venues that they played for like no money. I think a lot of his visual choices, even if they are very pared down, and he even talks about it as like being suppressed, that he felt that, he had progressed and he was kind of deliberately trying to tone himself down. I think there's an element that kind of works with the with the story that they are telling in this one. And I do find it interesting that, he gets the music milieu, I think, right. I am curious what the Springsteen version would have been, and what a Springsteen performance would have looked like in a Paul Schrader movie. I have no idea if it would have looked like this, or how much it changed due to the fact that Michael J. Fox and Joan Jett got involved in it. But it's a cute little story that they were briefly involved, and that Paul Schrader somehow came up. I mean, not somehow, it's not like the most unique title in the world, but it is amazing to look at your liner notes for Born in the USA and see "Thank you, Paul Schrader" in there. It's just a kind of a beautiful sight. Awesome. But yeah, I don't know. I found this movie cute, and I found I found most of the 4 main performances quite moving. I liked how small scale it was. Schrader embeds himself in this stuff quite well. And it's all an excuse to craft this cathartic narrative where these young punk rock kids find a little bit of grace and forgiveness with their religious parents. And that last scene between Rollins and Jett is it's so raw and real. And it was very, very moved by it. So yeah, this was a solid 3 for me.
Nice. Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's a solid 3 for me as well. It's a lot more subtle than what I'm used to with Schrader, but that was really interesting to look at. And then once you get to that finale, like you said, I think that's full Schrader through and through. That's the Schrader I know and love. And I really do like. We didn't talk about him a lot because he does kind of have a subtle presence, but I think Jason Miller as the dad is really good in the scenes that he does have. There's a couple moments where he's just honestly like, he might have 2 lines of dialogue and he just sits in his lazy boy chair and like
just sad watching baseball. Yeah. I was like, I want to hug him.
This is acting right here. There's a lot coming from this man.
That guy could have been Springsteen's dad right there.
Exactly. But then you get the moments where Gina's character actually does pass, and then he's like, I don't even know what to do anymore, and just hugs Michael J. Fox. There's something about the subtlety that kind of leads into more sadness, whether that's on purpose or not. I think it really works with Jason Miller. And I love just all the details of the tour stuff, which I wish there was a little more on the road footage and moments, but I do like what they have, like negotiating the price, playing to no one or very unenthusiastic crowds, selling. I think at the beginning they show like they're selling cans to try to get a couple bucks for gas. They're living out of the van, of course. The van life is always interesting. And I wish there was a little more tour stuff, but I do like what's in there. And
Jamie, that's the movie you're going to write.
It's in the brain. We'll see if it ever fucking happens. If I ever sit down and actually stop being lazy. But yeah, I do have a good time with this. And I do, just being in a band that's from Cleveland, I did like seeing the beginning, like cityscape, and seeing the. Did
you recognize any venues? I meant to ask you this.
No, I'm not. They did. I saw that they filmed in a bunch of different locations. Cleveland was included, but I'm curious as to what venues were in which location, because I don't think I recognized any of them. But
gotcha.
Yeah, but still, very cool. Very cool. So
all good. Yeah. For you, Steven.
3 stars.
No other.
Look at that. Nailed it. All right. Short and sweet. Amazing. That I think is going to wrap it up, though. We don't want to take any more of Steven's time here. That was, how am I already, I do this every goddamn episode. Why am I blanking on what it is that we just talked about here? That was True Confessions from 1981, as well as Light of Day from 1987. Thanks so much to Steven for joining us this week. Once again, the book is There Was Nothing You Could Do, Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA and the End of the Heartland. Be sure to pick it up wherever you get your books from. Check it out. I got a pre-copy of it, and I learned a lot about Bruce Springsteen from it, and it made me go back into his music. So I would definitely recommend checking it out if you are into that, and I would hope that you are. I would also recommend, just before we say what's coming up next week too, if you want to see more Joan Jett, by the way, I have to recommend this concert doc called Erg, A Music War from 1981. It's kind of a lesser known Stop Making Sense, like post-punk new wave concert doc. Jonathan Demme apparently almost directed it. So if you do like Stop Making Sense, it might be a good thing to follow that up with. But it has some great acts of the genre in it. Devo, The Police, Klaus Nomi, Oingo Boingo, Gary Newman, lots of great sets. But there's a great moment in it where the Go-Go's do We Got the Beat, and Joan Jett does a heavier version of Bad Reputation. And it's great performances, and it sandwiches the Dead Kennedys in a crazy, just like bands I would not associate with each other. But in 1981, all those bands were a little bit heavier, so they put them all on a ticket together. But the Cramps are in there. So if people are looking for more 80s rock mindset and more Joan Jett, that was one of the things that I saw her in recently. So I would check that out.
I will do that.
But for our listeners, in 1 week's time, we are going to be back over on the Patreon, where we are going to be talking about, as Jamie alluded to, the late, great Roger Corman, who recently passed. Rest in peace to a legend. We actually didn't do an episode on him that long ago. I think we did was it last Spooktober that we did a Vincent Price and Roger Corman, so. Edgar Allan Poe double feature. I think we did The House of Usher and The Pit and the Pendulum, and it kind of inspired us, with Roger, everyone kind of saying all these things about, these amazing things about Roger Corman, all the, the long career he had as both a director and also a producer, and just the guy who gave all these great filmmakers their first start. So we're going to do a sequel episode. We're going to talk about more Corman, more Price, and more Poe. We're going to talk about their big one, The Mask of Red Death, which is somehow we haven't covered it yet, but I do think it is my favorite Corman film that I've seen. So I'm very excited to talk about that. And we're going to be pairing it with one I don't think either of us have seen, The Haunted Palace.
No, I haven't.
So
anything with haunting, though, down.
Yeah. So, but it's more Price, more Poe, more Corman. So I feel like how can you go wrong? So we're going to talk about The Haunted Palace and The Mask of Red Death. And then we're going to be back in 2 weeks' time with a special guest where we are doing 2 movies I literally have not even heard of.
Love that. That's one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah, I'm going to look these up again just to make sure that I'm getting these right. So we're going to be talking about a movie called Dr. Death, which I'm trying to remember. I don't even remember what I actually can't even find this movie. This is how obscure this is. I don't even remember I think there's an alternate title for it that I'm not looking up here correctly, but maybe it's called Seeker of Souls here. Dr. Death, Seeker of Souls. I think that's what it is. So we're going to be talking about that, and we're going to be pairing it with another doctor. Get ready for this one. Dr. Gore.
Oh, hell yeah. That's awesome. I'm loving this.
From a title the other title is called The Body Shop. I have no idea what these movies are. The ratings from Mutuals are all over the place.
Oh man, you're saying all my favorite things right now.
Yeah, what the hell are these? Find out in 2 weeks' time over on the main feed.
We'll find out too.
But yeah, that is going to be it for this week's episode. Look forward to all of that, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy, y'all.